As you heard in the video, I was born in Bristol, England, where I had to navigate a fourth-generation family business on the brink of bankruptcy and turn it into a once again successful business. That's my story. Now let me tell you what I know about your story. From the point S dealers I've spoken to, either on the phone or in person, it's clear that you're operating in a very competitive marketplace, with big box stores, online discounters, and a lack of good people coming into the industry. But I think you may find some help in my story in terms of the challenges we faced and the way we overcame them that will help you with your challenges and, more importantly, with your opportunities. But I'd like to ask you a rhetorical question just to put things into context. What do you remember better, your first kiss or your first car? My first kiss, Claire. Not so good. My first car, Lola. Amazing. Let me tell you about her. Lola was a 1.6-litre fuel-injected Ford Orion. Gunmetal grey with just a fleck of silver in the paint that caught the sunlight just right. Absolutely gorgeous. And I remember one day Lola and I were taking a drive, and as we meandered along the English country road, she handled like a dream. But as we got close to my hometown of Bristol, Lola started to hesitate, and Lola was never one to hesitate. I pulled over to the side of the road just as her engine failed. Now, I had no idea what was wrong, but I did know I was going to have to call the local Ford dealership, which just happened to be owned by my family. And as I set off to find a payphone, I thought, I know, I'll phone my father's assistant, Jean. She'll know what to do. Hello, Jean, it's Richard. Is Dad there? No, don't interrupt him. I've broken down. I'm on Cumberland Road, by the cathedral, that's right. Yeah, no, I've no idea what's wrong. Oh, brilliant, if you could send a couple of guys. Oh, and Jean, please don't tell Dad. Okay, thanks, bye. As I sat there waiting for the tow truck to turn up, all I could think was brilliant. Now they're really going to think I'm the idiot son of the owner of the largest Ford dealership in the city, and I can't even figure out how to start my own car. Just as I was thinking that, the truck turned up with two guys on board, Nigel, our most experienced mechanic, and his young apprentice, Charlie. Oh, Nigel, thank you so much for coming. I don't know what's wrong. I've tried turning her over, nothing, completely dead. I think it might be something to do with the fuel injection system. All right, mate, no worries. Give us the keys. Let's have a look. Nigel jumped into the driver's seat. A couple of minutes later, he jumped back out. Well, mate, it's definitely a fuel problem. You ain't got any. At this point, Charlie, laughing hysterically, jumped out the truck, grabbed a small empty gas can and yelled, "All right, governor, as I'm here, do you want me to do the honours and fill her up?" And I watched as he walked the 20 feet to the gas station I was parked next to. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, Nigel yelled, "Charlie, show some respect to Mr. Bryan. This Einstein here is going to be our boss in a few years." And 10 years later, when I was his boss, every time I walked through the workshop and made eye contact with Nigel, he'd just look at me and go, as if the whole thing was our little secret. But I knew full well he told everyone on the shop floor, and probably any bloke in the pub who cared to listen. I can just picture him now on a Friday night in a Rose and Crown. "All right, boys, time for our toast. We raise our beers and give 3 cheers, and we do it all in fun. To Mr. Richard Bryan, his lordship, our boss, the idiot son." Well, at least that's kind of how I imagined it went. But such was life growing up as the fourth generation in a family business. Now, I'd like to share with you a little bit more about my family business story, just so that you can understand my comments today in context. So, to say that I grew up in the shadow of the family business would be an understatement, because we had 4 generations of the same family living in the same house, which meant that as a young person, there was always plenty of wisdom that was dished out on a regular basis, whether you asked for it or not. And yes, I am the little blonde chap sat in the back seat with the page boy haircut, sat next to my father, Michael, who's giving us a wave. My grandfather, Jim, is driving the car. And it's my great-grandfather, James Bryan, who sat in the front also giving us a wave. And it was James who started the business at the turn of the century. He was a taxi driver, one of the first vehicles on the road back then. And then in 1913, he opened his first small garage for doing repairs and maintenance on the few other vehicles that were on the road back then. And here's a picture of that humble sort of beginnings, and it's next to the Cathedral Hotel. This is right in the center of Bristol, which is the main town in the southwest of England. And I love this picture because I'd imagine this is what rush hour looked like in 1913. But it was in 1933 that James got his first big break when he was awarded the Ford franchise for Bristol. Bryan Brothers were one of the first Ford main dealers in the southwest of England. And it was as a Ford dealership that the business grew, with my grandfather and then my father subsequently joining the business. And then I came along and I went to high school in my hometown of Bristol. And then I went to university in Edinburgh, Scotland, because I decided I should learn a foreign language. Those of you that have been to Scotland will know what I'm talking about. My first year, my flatmate was from Glasgow, and he spoke a bit like this. "All right, Richie, how you doing? Great, magic. Fancy going for a few scoops tonight?" First time he asked me that, I thought we were going out for ice cream, but apparently scoops is pints or beers, so it was all very confusing. So anyway, I've graduated university with a major in business and a minor in Scottish as a second language. And then I got a job with Ford Motor Company. You see, my father realized that although I'd grown up in the business doing every job imaginable, I really needed some perspective. I needed to get away, and I needed to go and work for someone else. And as our main franchise was Ford, where better to come and work than the United States? So I was very fortunate that I worked for a couple of the biggest and best dealers in the country. And I spent time in Fairfax, Virginia, and in Denver, Colorado. And I'd like to think my time in Denver was particularly well spent, because it was while I was there that I met my wife, Melissa. And we've now been married for 24 years. And I've got to tell you that on the roller coaster ride that has been my family business journey, I could not have done it without her by my side. She's been absolutely fantastic. And I'm not just saying that because she's in the room, but she's been great. So there I was in my mid-20s. I had a challenging but enjoyable job. I'd met my wife, and I was absolutely loving living in the United States. And then I got a phone call from my mother that changed everything. My father was going into hospital for an operation, but not just any operation. He was going to have his leg amputated. Now, if you're diabetic, that's serious, but if you also have a heart condition, it's life-threatening. So she said to me, "Richard, I know you're doing well over there in America, but it would mean so much to him if he knew you were coming back to join the business." Well, rule number 1 in our business was you don't say no to your mum. I flew home and I joined the family business. Now, I'm pleased to say that my father survived his operation, but he never worked full-time again. And by the time I was 28, I was running the business. So flash forward to 1998, this is what one of our dealerships looked like. My office was just off this showroom. And, well, it looks pretty, doesn't it? But looks can be deceiving. You see, at this time, we had sales of $120 million a year, 6 locations, 360 staff. But somehow we were managing to lose almost $3.5 million a year. We had a bank overdraft of $5 million, and we had a lot of staff who were entitled because of their length of service rather than focused on customer satisfaction and profitability. So hey, not the best situation to walk into. Now, I don't know if you can remember what you were like at 28, but most of my friends, the biggest decision they had to make that day was what beer they were going to have at the pub that night. And I was expected to turn this business around. But I knew in my gut that I lacked the experience and I lacked the credibility to turn around a business of this size. And that wasn't just with our bank and our manufacturers, it was even with some of our own staff who'd been working for the company longer than I'd been alive. So you can imagine they were thrilled when I became CEO. And so the thing that brought this into focus really sharply was my first meeting with our bank manager. We'll call him Tom, because that was actually his name. And I met Tom, and he said, well, congratulations on becoming a dealer principal. It's very exciting. We are, however, a little concerned about the scale of the losses and, well, your ability to repay the overdraft. So I'd like to introduce you to our special team in London. Tom, special team, that sounds a little bit like asset recovery. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about? Well, that's another name for them, yes. Please don't do that, Tom. Just give me 6 months and I'll put a plan together. 6 months. I'm pleased to say that after about half an hour discussion, Tom agreed to give me 6 months. Now, I had no idea how I was going to turn this around, but I did know that I was going to need some help. And so I set out to find someone to help me. And after an exhaustive search, I came up with a shortlist of 6 candidates who I started interviewing. And I've got to tell you, it was a little bit sobering because I realized after interviewing the first 4 that they all had 2 things in common: huge salary expectations and even bigger egos. And I was starting to sort of give up on this, and then I met candidate number 5, Frank. He was an unusual character. 6'3" Scotsman, sandy blonde hair, piercing blue eyes. He was ex-Special Forces with a fine arts degree. He's the sort of guy that could paint you a pretty nice picture, but you knew that if you didn't like it, he could kill you. He was different, that's for sure. And I remember our first meeting, he came in, we shook hands, he took a seat, and I started on my list of prepared questions. Right then, Frank, you've seen the financials, you know the situation. What's the first thing you would do if you got this job to stop the losses? Coffee. I quite like coffee. I'd start with a cup of coffee. Coffee. If we do get to work together, you'll find out I drink an unhealthy amount of coffee. In fact, a few years ago, I got the shake, so I stopped drinking it. Then I realized I was still shaking. I thought, might as well enjoy myself. Right. I ordered us some coffee, thinking this was another waste of time, albeit a more entertaining one. And then an amazing thing happened. The caffeine must have kicked in because he gave me a brilliant step-by-step plan of exactly what we were going to do. Not just to stop the losses, but to put the business back on the road to success. It was an absolute masterclass. And I realized towards the end of the interview that I hadn't been interviewing him. Frank had been interviewing me. We shook hands once more, and Frank just looked at me and said, Richard, I know I'm expensive, but I'll promise you one thing, I'll get the job done. And he left, and I remember standing in my office with this sort of wave of emotion coursing through my body, like a massive adrenaline rush, because I realized that with someone like Frank by my side, we might just be able to turn this thing around. So over the next 10 years, with Frank's help, we went from losing $3.5 million a year to making a very healthy profit. And the first lesson I learned was from Frank was to run the business as if we were grooming it for a sale. Now, that wasn't the case back in 1998, but it certainly meant that we ran things lean and mean, and we took out any unnecessary costs. However, that wasn't always popular with some of our shareholders, because we had 16 shareholders. And guess what? We were all related. Oh, so much fun. You don't know a good time till you work with your family, that's what I say. And I remember one of the things Frank said, look, we've got to get the shareholders on board. Without that, we're finished. So we managed to get everyone in one room, which was easier said than done, because I lived in Canada and all around the UK. And we had this big sort of U-shaped table, and I was stood at the front of the room, youngest person in the room and only family member in the business. And I gave them the good news, which is, you know, you used to getting a new car every 2 to 3 years. Well, we're not doing that anymore. Just keep the car you've got, and when you come into the dealership for parts or service, you now have to pay. But don't worry, you get the staff discount of 10%. They were absolutely thrilled, as you can imagine. Then I gave them the really good news. I said, you know that check you get just before Christmas? It's called a dividend or a distribution. Well, we're out of cash, so we're not doing that anymore either. At this point, the room went crazy. And I looked over to the corner where Frank was sat, drinking coffee. And I said, Frank, anything you'd like to add? Which was code for help. This situation, it reminds me of a cannibal eating his own arm. It's quite tasty, but you know it's got no long-term future. At which point, half the room started laughing, and the other half looked really confused, much like you. And he went on to say, look, we can worry about who gets what when we get back into profit, but for now, all we're asking for is that you get behind Richard and I, and we're going to do whatever it takes to try and save this thing. Because, frankly, if we can't survive the next year, it's all irrelevant. And to their credit, they did let us get on with it. But as I said, we did manage to turn it around. We added some new franchises. We managed to grow sales and consistently grow profitability through having better margins. And I often get asked, well, if that's the case, why did you sell the business? And there's two reasons for that, really. One was that we were being asked by 2 different manufacturers to build brand new dealerships, which meant even allowing for the fact that we had some cash reserves by this point, we were still going to have to borrow $10 million. And I wasn't really comfortable with that, having just got out of the hole, and I worried that if there was another downturn, we could be in serious trouble. And just as I was having those thoughts, we got made a very good offer. We'd had 2 or 3 offers in the past that we'd turned down, but this one was just a much better fit culturally. It was another family-owned business locally, slightly bigger than us, and they wanted to take on all the franchises, but not the real estate, which suited the shareholders down to the ground. So it was a good deal for the shareholders, but it was also a really good deal for our employees, because instead of having 6 franchises, they suddenly had about 15. So it was a win-win, and we sold that business. Now, the thing about Frank that was great was he asked me questions that So it took me beyond the immediate crisis to thinking about the future. And I realize not everyone is lucky enough to have a Frank, but I'd like to ask you a question, and no need to raise your hand on this, but how many of you actually have a succession plan in place? Because a lot of times we act as if none of us in this room are going to die, or at least that's how we behave, because what if we do? Do you have a plan in place for your family and your business, or is it going to be like a giant scavenger hunt for them to figure out? And I just want to share with you some stats. This is for family businesses in the United States. This is family business succession stats, and it shows just how difficult it is to do. So first generation to second generation. By the way, 70% of family businesses in the US who were asked in this massive survey said that they would like to transition their business to the next generation. First generation to second generation, 30% managed to do that. Second generation to third generation, 12%. By the time you get third to fourth generation, it's 3%. And then beyond that, fourth to fifth, it's only 1%. I think that just goes to show what a difficult process this is. And there's a number of reasons for that. But a lot of it is just not planning far enough ahead. So let me ask you, will your business die with you, or will you leave a legacy that continues for another generation? You know, on my travels, I recently met a business owner from Wisconsin. He owned a large accident repair center there. And he told me a story about him and his brother who ran the business together. Tragically, his brother was killed in a car crash. And he said to me, you know, I'm so thankful that we did the work ahead of time, not just for our long-term succession plan to our children, but also to have a disaster recovery plan in place. Because when that happened, it was obviously a crushing blow emotionally, but we already had a lot of the communications and a lot of things planned that meant we were able to communicate with our own employees, but also with our key customers in a way very quickly to reassure them that the business was going to continue and that we had a plan in place. And he said, I have since been thanked by members of my staff who came to me and said, I don't know how you did that at that time, but it meant a lot to us to know that our jobs were safe. So a lot of it is planning ahead. And according to a recent study quoted in USA Today, this is a study of privately held businesses, 58% had absolutely no succession plan. And one of my other favorite things that I always ask business owners when I meet them, small to medium-sized business owners, do you have a long-term succession plan in place? Oh, yeah, I've got a plan. It's all up here. Well, that's great, but my advice is to try and get it all down here, because unless it's in writing, it's not something that is going to be any use. So I encourage you to put some time aside and think about your succession and get something in writing. But I strongly believe that another key factor in having a successful succession, try saying that after a few beers, is A players. And, you know, Frank always said to me that when you're looking for A players for your business, you need to start by finding people who don't know that what you're asking them to do is impossible. And the funny thing about A players is you find them in the strangest of places. And I remember many years ago, my wife was shopping for a stroller for our first child. And she phoned me from this store and she said, I'd like you to come down to the store. I said, really, darling, I'm pretty busy. Can you just buy whichever one you want? No, you don't understand. I want you to meet Louise. 10 minutes later, I walked into the store and I met Louise. 5'8", brown hair cut into a bob, business suit, immaculately dressed. I could tell she was a class act. She spent about 10 minutes asking us all sorts of qualifying questions about where we worked, what we liked to do for hobbies, where we went on vacation, all that sort of thing. And when she found out, she sprang into action. Oh, guys, I think this is going to be so much fun. You're going to be amazing parents, by the way. Now, come and look at this. This is the new stroller from Mamas and Papas. Look at this thing. Very sturdy, easy to fold down, easy to fold up again. I mean, it's even got cup holders. Richard, you said you like your coffee. Well, look at this. This is the travel version of the same stroller. Look, that would easily go in the overhead on a plane. And well, Melissa, you said you like to visit your family in Colorado. I tell you what, if you buy both of those today, I'll include free of charge that luxury baby travel cot you were looking at. So, how'd you like to pay, cash or credit? American Express? I spent $1,000 that day. $1,000, we didn't even have a baby yet. It was crazy. She was good. So good that I went back the next day and I gave her my business card and I said, Louise, I'm still in shock that I spent that much money, but it was awesome. And well, I'd like you to consider coming to work with me. No, I know you've not considered selling cars before, but I think you'd be pretty good at it, which would be good for you, but it'd also be pretty good for me. Just tell me you'll think about it. Well, a week later, she agreed to join us. But it was a leap of faith for both of us. She was going from a basic salary of $30,000 to a basic salary of $10,000. So I guaranteed her commission for the first 3 months. Now, I'd like to tell you that she was an overnight success, but actually she struggled a bit initially. She had a few things going against her. She had no product knowledge, no customer base, didn't really understand our sales process. Oh, and she was the only woman on a sales team of 30 guys. And then my sales manager, Bob, found out what she used to do for a living. She sold buggies! Baby buggies! Richard, are you serious? She's never sold a car in her life. I mean, I know they both got 4 wheels, but really? I got targets to hit. I got Ford all over me. I mean, this is a serious business. Bob, calm down. You're going to do yourself some damage. Look, she's got a great attitude. She works hard. Just continue to support her and she'll be fine. Well, she was better than fine. By the end of that year, she was our top retail salesperson. The following year, she sold almost 300 cars in a very competitive dealership. And I guess we didn't tell her that we only budgeted for 150 per salesman. So, as no one told her, she went and sold 300. And what I learned from this experience is when you're looking for A players is don't just look for experience, but look for people who have a great attitude and transferable skills. Because if you can surround yourself with these people, you can achieve amazing results. And Louise single-handedly helped us to turn around what was a loss-making new car sales department. But when I think about A players, I also think about advisors, and particularly when it comes to planning for the future. You know, it's very difficult to put a good succession plan in place without getting advice. And in terms of A-player advisors, my CPA, Carl, is phenomenal. He's worked with me to help me buy back or buy out some of the minority shareholders in the business, sell the car business, start the commercial real estate business, and put a pretty robust succession and disaster recovery plan in place. He's just been brilliant, and I trust him completely. And he asks questions like, well, what do you want to achieve, and what's your time scale? And then he works with us to come up with a detailed plan. And so for me, it was my CPA, but it could be your lawyer, it could be your financial advisor, someone who's a trusted advisor to you. And I know when I spoke to Nolan Calvin that he put a plan together for his dealership, and that was with his lawyer. So it's just whoever you have that rapport with and you can trust, but for sure it's very difficult to do it by yourself. And when I think about Carl, I don't so much think about what he's costing me for the advice. I think about what value is he generating. What value is he generating for the long term of my business? Because when it comes to advisors, good advice is expensive, but bad advice can be really expensive. And so who are the A players in your business life and in your personal life, and what are you doing to retain them? And so, salary and rewards are important, but praise and recognition are possibly even more important when it comes to retaining A players, because they already know what their market value is. So I'd encourage you to find a way to recognize those people and make sure that you're not just taking for granted what they're doing for your business. Because someone like Louise, I guarantee you, she used to get job offers all the time. And I had to pay close attention to that. And I know Bob Cooper from Elite's going to speak about this tomorrow during the training, so I think that'll be great. It's so important. But when it comes to making tough decisions, when I first met Frank, he described me as having paralysis by analysis. He said you were so lost in the numbers trying to figure out where you were losing money that you'd stopped actually making decisions and taking action. And one of the most important things you can do is actually face up to those tough decisions and get them. In fact, when I first hired him, I said, right, Frank, what's the strategy? He said, well, we're going to make decisions every day, and we're going to try and get more right than we get wrong. Right, is that it? All right, that's it. We're going to get more right than we get wrong, and we're going to implement. Right, good. Glad I'm paying you so much money. But that's what we did, and with his help, I did face up to making some very tough decisions, and the one that is burned into my memory as being one of the most difficult things I ever had to do was to close a loss-making truck dealership. We had tried everything in the short period of time that we had to turn this around. We tried new systems, new management, even a new franchise, but we were running out of cash and we were under serious pressure from the bank. And this dealership was still burning cash at almost $1 million a year. And so finally, we had no choice but to close it. And it was very painful because we had to lay off 70 people and write off almost $300,000 worth of part stock. So financially and emotionally, it felt like a crushing blow and the biggest failure of my life. But with hindsight, I can tell, looking back, that we did absolutely the right thing. And if we hadn't acted and closed that dealership, we would have lost everything. Another difficult but very different situation was a year after my father had retired due to ill health, he decided to unretire again. He just forgot to mention it to me first. So I got back from a meeting with Ford Motor Company, and there were my office was right by the used car sales lot, and there must have been like 100 cars missing. So there's this big hole. And we had this huge sale starting that next day, which was a Saturday. And we'd been on the radio, in the press, all the local media. We spent a fortune. And so I phoned my French fleet sales manager, Serge, and said, Serge, what's going on? Where are those cars? Richard, your father, he was here earlier, and he said the site it looked busy, and so could we move those cars and get them away? Okay, so what did you do? I moved them to another dealership. I mean, he's Mr. Brian, no? Okay, Serge, great. That's great. We spent the rest of the day, everyone moving cars frantically on it, which is not what you want to be doing in Friday afternoon traffic in Bristol. But we managed to get them back just in time before the sale started the next morning. That night, I phoned my mother, who was normally my biggest ally, and said, "Mum, I just don't get it. What's he thinking? Unretiring and start just coming in and making these decisions and then disappearing again?" And she said, "No, you don't get it. You know, your father has worked for that business for 45 years. He probably should have retired 5 years ago because of his health, but he kept going in the hope that one day you would take it on. So part of your new role as dealer principal is to figure out his new role." Okay, put a slightly different spin on it. And so I came away from that thinking, okay, she's absolutely right. He needs a purpose and he needs some status. And we ended up calling him chairman of the board. He didn't have an operational role, but he kept an office at the dealership. And he'd come in and visit, and he would do all the things that I didn't have time for, such as attending the Chamber of Commerce meetings. He'd go to all the local charity and Rotary events and represent the company, which gave him the status, but it also gave him a purpose and a reason to get out of bed in the morning, which was so important. And I think we overlook that when we're doing our planning, and I certainly did, because it wasn't a matter of needing to work. Financially, he was pretty secure. He just needed something to do. And all his friends were other dealers, and all his vacations were dealer trips. And so suddenly he stopped being invited to everything, and it was a massive deal. And instead, every Wednesday, we would have a meeting for about an hour in his office, and I'd bring him up to speed with what was happening in the business, and then we'd go out for lunch. And that actually became something that I really treasured, because not just spending time with my dad one-on-one, which was great, but also I could share absolutely anything with him confidentially, and that was a huge benefit to me as well. But here are some succession planning scenarios to think about. The first one is where you sell your business to a partner or a manager. The second one is you transition to a family member if you have one in the business. The third one is to sell to an investor, and the fourth one is to sell to an industry buyer or another dealer or dealer group, which is effectively what I did. I sold to another dealer group. We actually kept the family business intact, the holding company. We sold the car dealerships, and overnight, with the same shareholders, we became a property company. So now we do commercial real estate development and investment. But the further you plan ahead, the more options you'll have. And I'm not intending to retire from my commercial real estate business for at least another 10 to 15 years, but we're already working on our succession plan. Because if you don't plan ahead, you can end up selling your business for a massive discount, or even worse, just winding it up and closing it. And what a great shame that is when it's been your life's work. Now, I've got some additional resources for you on a site called Kiwi Live. So if you go to Kiwi Live and type in the word plan, you'll be able to get my succession planning ebook, which is sort of top tips for getting started on your plan. There's also a template, which is like getting everything together for your disaster recovery plan, and another article on there that I think you might find quite useful. But I'm also around for the next few days, and if anyone wants to ask me something individually, I'd love to talk to you about it. I know that most people would rather have root canal surgery than talk about succession planning, but I think we can all agree as business owners, although it's not urgent, it's important. It's really important to the long term. And it's like getting your will done personally. It's not something you want to talk about or you want to do, but you feel much better once you've got it in place. And a while ago, I took Tom, the banker, for a round of golf just before he retired. And as we were going up onto the first tee, I said to him, "Tom, just be honest with me. When we first met all those years ago, and I sort of persuaded you to give me 6 months, did you think we could turn it around?" He was just addressing the ball, gave his golf club a little waggle, looked up at me and said, "Not a chance." Well, I'm thankful that Tom did take a chance on me. I'm also thankful that I met Frank when I did. He was the right man at the right time, and without his help, I certainly wouldn't have survived. And I think my great-grandfather would, if he was around today, would be proud of the way that we have survived some tough times and still managed to keep the family business intact, and even the way we've transitioned from cars to real estate. But I think he'd be most proud of the fact that we've got a family business in its 4th generation, and we're planning for the next generation. This is a picture of my family a few years ago on vacation, and my son, Austin, who's now a junior in college, is preparing to do an internship with a real estate company this summer, and that's really part of grooming him to have the relevant experience for our business, to give him the option, if he wants to get involved with it in the future, that he can do. And we'll definitely be doing the same sort of thing with my daughter once she gets into college. We also have a disaster recovery plan in place in the event that something happens to my wife and I, and I'm very happy to share that with you. If you want to give me a business card, I'll share that information with you. It's just a PDF. My great-grandfather's name was James Bryan, but he was known as the Governor. He was pretty tough. And I got to know him pretty well because he lived with us for the last 12 years of his life. And that's how I know that this is a picture of him in a good mood. But he was an amazing man. I mean, he went from being a taxi driver to the owner of one of the largest independently owned Ford dealerships in the UK. And he had to survive not 1, but 2 world wars and some really difficult economic times in the late 20s and early 30s. And he still found a way to persevere and to build a great business. So when he said something, you tended to listen. And I remember when I was about 14 years old, sat with him on a Saturday morning around the kitchen table, and we were sharing a pot of English tea. And he said to me, "In my experience, business owners overlook 2 things. They don't tend to plan far enough ahead, and they have dreams, but they just don't tend to dream big enough. And if you don't dream big enough, you can't possibly reach your full potential." So I hope that when you leave here and go back to your businesses, that you take some time to plan for the future of your business and your family. But I hope also that when you're doing that planning, you don't just dream, but you make sure that you dream big enough. Thank you very much.